Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, where today we are going to be doing a full review of Late Eclipses by Seanan McGuire, the fourth book in the October Daye series. For anybody that doesn't know, I have been doing a reread of this entire series for this year in anticipation of book 14 coming out September 1st. For my full reviews for this series, I do break them up into three parts. The first part is a non-spoilery section where I just kind of review the book itself. The second section is a spoilery for this book kind of section. It's just my general thoughts. And then lastly, the third section is any of my thoughts that are spoilery for the series beyond this book. So you can totally click away whenever you want to, so that you're not spoiled if you don't want to be. But with that, let's just jump right in and talk about the plot of this book. So in this book, we are following, obviously, October Daye. She is a half-fae, half-human knight. And in this particular book, one of her allies has taken ill, which is very strange because the physiology of this particular ally doesn't really allow for them to be ill. And so, obviously, Toby suspects foul play. Another ally gets sick, an enemy comes out, appears out of nowhere, and so Toby is trying to figure out what's going on and save people before they die and all that kind of stuff. This is a plot that I think is decent. It's not my favorite, but it is good. And I think that it works in a lot of different ways. I like that it allows us to see a lot of the different characters and push them along. It's an interesting kind of thing, as it also helps with some of the world building as we learn more about these characters and why things are so weird. I mean, it just works. It helps move this series forward in a lot of different ways, and I think that it's done in a very interesting kind of way. So let's talk about world building. So this series is phenomenal for world building, and in this book it's really nice because Seanan McGuire has finally gotten to the point where she has laid the foundation so thoroughly for this world that she only needs to add on little bits and pieces for things to make sense. And she's able to do that very nicely through just the regular narrative. There really aren't any long info dumpy sections anymore. It feels like part of the book, and it's just so nice. The world building is so good. It feels like this could legitimately be a world that exists within our own world. And that is awesome. Speaking of, this is also the book where it becomes very clear that Seanan McGuire started this series with a plan. She had to have built out this world pretty extensively before the first book. She had to have had a really, really good idea of the plot before the first book. And it kind of becomes apparent in this book because a lot of the clues that were laid about a particular thing in the first three books kind of finally come together in this one. And so we get this big payoff for having read the first three books as well as this one. And so that's really nice. And I like, it's part world building, part character growth, part all this kind of other stuff. And it's good. So let's talk about the characters, their development and growth. I like the characters in general. We're introduced to another new character because we always are. This time, Walter. Walter is delightful. I really do like Walter. And we do check in on a lot of the other characters we have met through the series. There are a lot of them, so we don't spend a ton of time with all of them. But I like that we do check in with them. I like that we get to see kind of these little scenes with them. And then in relation to character growth, I think it's very interesting that we're seeing a lot of the growth happen off page. So, for example, there was the big thing that happened at the end of book 3, that there was this thing that Toby had to accept about herself, and it kind of changes her outlook on her life and how she approaches things. But she did a lot of that growth of how does this change my life off page. And then we meet her again in this book, and she's done a lot of it already. Not all of it. We do still see some of the growth on page, but a good chunk of it is just done off screen. And I kind of like that. I like that we're not sitting there as we're dealing with her inner monologues of what does that mean for me? You know, like we just get to move into the action. And I really I just appreciate that. Additionally, Quentin's growth. I love Quentin. Quentin is becoming like that true knight, and it's so delightful to see. And then lastly, let's talk about pacing. So I did think that there was a little bit of an issue with the pacing in this book. Now, part of that might be bias on my part because I've seen what the books do later. But essentially because of who Toby is. Like, Toby hasn't seen a lot in Fae land. She's only like 60 years old or something. So she hasn't seen a lot. She doesn't done a lot. She's still a baby in a lot of their eyes. She doesn't have a ton of authority because she is a changeling. I mean, she's not super comfortable jumping into a situation and being like, I've seen this before, or this is where I need to go. Like, she flounders a little bit. And that's what happened in this book, was like the first 100 to 150 pages was Toby trying to gather information. Like, everything has changed, and she's like sitting there trying to get her feet under her for that first 100 to 150 pages. And for me, I found that to be extremely slow, and I did not necessarily appreciate that. I thought it was fine, but it wasn't my favorite. After that, however, it was like a downhill slide to the end. It was just super fast paced and very interesting. It was like once she kind of figured out what she was doing, she just went and she did it, and we got all the information as she went along, and it was very interesting. It's just that first chunk of it. So I really just did not like that, but I accepted it because I understand why it was happening. So overall, I do like this book. Each book in this series gets better and better. And again, we're talking about, this is a book where we have a big payoff for having read the first 3. And so I do think without that payoff, it's a decent book, but that payoff takes it into good book where you enjoy it. That being said, this is not a standalone. So please, I mean, like, if you read these books, the books in this series out of order, I mean, you can. There's going to be a lot that doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense, but you can, and they're decent books. But you're not going to understand what the hype is about. You have to read them in order because it builds on itself so well. So that was it. Those are all my non-spoilery thoughts for this book. So if you do not want to be spoiled, you should go ahead and click away now. Okay, so I thought, obviously, there is so much going on in this book that is wrapped up in Toby realizing that she is not Dunya She. She is not the Fae race that she thought she was. She is Docious She. But I thought it was interesting because before she finds out, obviously, like, Walter looks at her and is point blank tells her, you don't look Dunya She. And I'm sitting here going, because she's not. And then, like, she has the iron poisoning. And Tybalt point blank says that this is, like, the worst case of iron poisoning he has ever seen. But we're also told that Dunya She do not have accelerated healing. So how was Toby able to survive, right? And then we have, afterwards, we have Connor and Danny in the taxi just being like, we should have seen it. Because Dunya She don't have that accelerated healing, and like, given what Toby has done in the past, she should have been killed years ago. And so I really thought that that was really interesting. And of course, you know, talking about Amandine being a firstborn, and I thought that that was it was really interesting to at the end, for the Lushak to be able to be so honest with Toby, like, you are my niece. And of my nieces, all my nieces and nephews, you are like by far the most troublesome. But I love that the Lushak is able to be that honest with her. It completely changes their relationship while not changing it kind of at all. And I think that that's a really cool thing to see between them. And then, of course, like, when going to the dream that Toby has that's actually a resurfaced memory, and she is remembering Amandine's in her tower and Oleander coming to talk to her. And then at one point Oleander says something, and then Amandine does something, and it makes it get it Oleander ends up in a lot of pain, and it's not clear what's happening, but based off of Toby's description of Amandine changing the balance of her blood, I think it's a safe guess that Amandine was changing the balance of Oleander's blood. And I think it's so interesting to see that, knowing that that's probably what it is. Let's see. And then just kind of one-off interesting things. Like I thought it was such a gut punch after Lily dies that Tybalt started crying. Like I just felt so many things at that. I love Tybalt. So like, I was just like, don't cry. Okay, I understand why you're crying, but like, and then obviously the other really big gut punch was when Etienne and Toby were talking, and Toby says something like, I would feel so bad making Sylvester send his daughter off to the Queen to face punishment. And Etienne looks at her and it's like, well, what do you think he felt when the guards took you? Like, with obviously the implication that Toby is his daughter as well. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And like, I was just like, ugh. And of course, like, I saw it. Like, everybody can see it, but Toby, like, Toby is so oblivious about it, about relationships, that is just kind of amazing. So there was that gut punch. And then just the scene with Amandine, I thought it was interesting how the changeling's choice was described to Toby versus how it was described to by everybody else. Because Toby was just like, we went back to my room and I had a conversation with my mother. It was fine. Like, I didn't like it. We maybe yelled a little, but it wasn't. But like, if you look at the description of everybody else was just like, Amy came out of nowhere and she was standing over you and yelling at you to choose. And I think that it's a funny picture, but I think it was just really interesting, like how things are filtered. But honestly, like, obviously that's the big thing about this book, is that it finally ties in all those hints that we were given that Toby is not the Fae race that she thinks she is. And so now she can kind of go ahead and move forward. And so I am interested. I love this series. So I'm excited that we got to this big milestone. But that's all my spoilery thoughts for this book. If you do not want to be spoiled for the rest of the series, you should go ahead and click away now. Okay, I don't have a ton of stuff because it was so wrapped up in that Toby not being the Fae race that she thinks. Of course, like, I also have realized that Seanan McGuire started laying little hints that her heritage is much more complicated, given that Amandine is a firstborn and all this kind of stuff, and there are certain things that Toby needs to fulfill. Like, there's things going on behind the scenes with Amandine and Amandine's line. I'm very interested. We still don't have a ton of good answers on it, but I am very interested to see what those expectations are and all this kind of stuff. But in any case, I also think it was back to that dream sequence with Oleander and Amandine at the tower. I do think it's interesting knowing now what Simon and Oleander and Amandine were all to each other. That, oh, it was probably Simon that sent Oleander there. Duh. Like, that makes sense. And so it's interesting with that perspective and that knowledge, being able to be like, oh, this makes more sense. Lily's dying words were so cryptic, y'all, but I want to know. Like, what is Lily and Amandine to each other? What were they? Were they best friends? Were they lovers? Were they something else? Were they nothing? I want to know, and I don't know when we're going to find out. That's the thing. Like, we haven't found out through book 13, but I want to know. I want to know if we're ever going to find out too. Anyway, And then lastly is just like some a little observation that I made about Connor and Tybalt. And like, so right now, obviously we're sitting in that little love triangle area where she could have Connor or Tybalt. And we know that she makes the choice of Connor and then he dies and she ends up with Tybalt. But here's the thing. I don't think Connor was ever a good choice because Connor can't really keep up with her. And it was so obvious in this book when she tells Connor to go find guards and he sits there and argues with her. Whereas Tybalt generally doesn't argue with her much. He most often argues with her orders when he thinks that she's not taking care of her own safety. It's not that he doesn't ever argue with her, but more and more he just kind of follows orders and then like questions later. And it's like, you better tell me what is going on later. And then when he's questioning, it's again most often because she's not taking care of her own safety. And see, that's the thing, like Connor is soft. He really can't take care of himself in these dangerous situations. He doesn't follow orders. He questions everything, wastes time. Like he's just like, so now Toby is having to split resources to answer his questions or potentially like risk having him mad at her. And also she has to see to his safety because he can't see to it for himself. So she's splitting resources that she honestly really doesn't have enough of to split to take care of him. And I think that that's just not necessarily the right thing. Like, especially because I think that if Connor and Toby had stayed together, they would end up in this position where Toby would have to decide if she's a knight or if she's going to be a knight or if she's going to be with Connor, because I don't think that she would get to a point where she could not do both. So just my 2 cents on the whole idea. I think Tybalt is just much better suited to Toby. So like that was the thing. That was the point. But anyway, that's all. Those are all my thoughts about Late Eclipses. I think that this is an excellent, again, it's a book with the big payoff, while still laying down clues to the next big reveal. I am so excited. I know the next one is One Salt Sea, and in that one we meet Deanda Lorden, whom I adore. So I'm very, very excited to go ahead and read that. But that is it, you guys. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.